Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Karen McGrane, give her a hand.
So I did a lot of work with publishers. I led the redesign of the New York Times a few years back. I did digital design and strategy for The Atlantic, for National Journal. I've done Time Out and Fast Company. I've worked with a dozen different Conde Nast brands. I'm doing some work with Time Life right now. And I talked to a lot of big corporate clients about content strategy and publishing processes. And I like the insights that I get from working with the major publishers because in a sense, they're kind of like the canary in the coal mine. It's like they feel content problems so much more quickly. They have to respond to things. They have to adapt to changes in the publishing landscape more immediately. And so the poison gas that's like causing birds to drop out of the sky at the publishing houses these days is mobile. And more specifically, what's going on here? More specifically, the crazy multi-device future that we're living in, where they've got to like spray all their content out onto all of these different new devices and platforms. And so, you know, a lot of times when we talk about mobile, what we talk about is, we talk about it like it's a design problem or a development problem. Like we talk about how are we going to adapt the way that we present information to change the way that we style things for these tiny little screens. Or we talk about new gestural behaviors that we'll have to put in place so that people can interact with our stuff. Or we talk about it like it's a development problem. Like how are we going to maintain all these different code bases? How are we going to, you know, design interfaces that's going to work on all these different platforms? And so my whole shtick, the reason I'm here, is to talk about this as a content problem. So what is it that we do to make sure that all of the stuff that's really, you know, the whole reason that people are coming to our web experiences or our mobile experiences, how do we make sure that we can get all those things out onto all of the different platforms we need to? And, you know, frankly, the great Ethan Marcotte frames, you know, his whole approach to responsive design as if it's a content problem. So that we can't be fragmenting our content onto all of these different device-optimized experiences. We don't have the resources available to fork our content and then try to maintain it in lots of different platforms. And, you know, it's truthfully, people who are talking about it from a content perspective are also saying, we can't afford to do this. Like, we can't afford to be thinking about creating content that's going to live on any one platform. So instead, what we've got to do is we've got to think about what we can do to create more description around our content assets. We have to figure out ways that we can structure our content more effectively so that we can reuse it in lots of different places. And by doing that, we're going to get more value out of it. So let me give you an example. Two different companies, two very different strategies on how this works. NPR, obviously, is America's National Public Radio. Conde Nast is the major magazine publisher. They publish titles like The New Yorker and Vogue and Vanity Fair. So Conde Nast has been investing really heavily in creating custom iPad editions for many of its major titles, like GQ, Glamour, Wired, and Vanity Fair. And I had a conversation with the great Paul Ford. He writes F-Train. He's a friend of mine who used to work for Harper's. And I had a conversation with him when the iPad first came out. And I was like, Paul, you know, what do you think this is going to mean for all the publishing houses? Like, how are they going to finally adapt to having this big screen? And, you know, what are they going to do to really take advantages of the capabilities of this new platform? And he was like, I think we're going to usher in a golden age of PDFs on the iPad. And, you know, and it's true, right? I mean, any of you who've used any of these titles, it's like what you have there is basically like a giant picture of a magazine page. And, you know, it's like you think it's text, but it's not really text. You can't like search it. You can't like, it's not accessible. You can't forward that stuff to anybody. Thing weighs 300 megabytes. And it's because the publishing houses were basically like, great, fantastic. We've got this whole digital problem solved. Now we can just like take a picture of our magazine layout and like put it on the iPad and we're done. Great. And, you know, frankly, Conde Nast would be lucky if that was all they were doing. But no, they are going one step further. They are taking the pictures of their magazine, and then they're making their existing production staff, their existing art directors, stay up all night and weekend after the magazine's gone to bed, so that they can make not one but two custom layouts. So they're taking the exact same layout that they had in print, but then they're rearranging it a little bit so that they can have one version in portrait and one version in landscape. Because apparently they heard that these iPad editions have to be interactive, and so they're like, oh, okay, well, great, we'll let people interact with it by letting them like turn the screen around and they can see the content in a different layout. And it's like you just can see. I work a lot with these companies, and you can see the conversations that they're having. You can see the mindset that they're bringing to this. It's that they really believe that one of these days, one of these new technologies will come back. And it will take them back to a time where all of their value systems around putting ink on paper will finally come back into vogue. And it's like they're hearkening back to this era where it was like advertising rates were at an all-time high. They had the editors had limousines come and pick them up to take them to work every day. Every afternoon, the guy with a cart filled with cocaine would ride his way through the office aisles. It's like you see an organization that's saying, if only we can take our existing print layouts and their art direction and their content, and we can put them on the screen exactly the way that somebody would see them in print, then by God, we'll have figured out this whole digital thing. So, NPR, taking a very different strategy here. Okay, so this is a profoundly unsexy approach. This isn't going to look anywhere near as slick and glossy as the Conde Nast Vanity Fair app looks. But NPR has come up with a very different approach to how they treat their content. And they call it COPE, which stands for Create Once and Publish Everywhere. And so what this means is that they've set up an API. Basically, they have taken the ability to get content from all sorts of different content providers, whether that's all of their member stations, whether that's music coming from their partners. And they put in a layer of middleware. They put in an API that allows them to have this clean base of well-structured content coming out of their CMS that then they kind of stick that API in the middle like a straw, and it allows them to suck that out and get it out onto all sorts of different devices and platforms easily without having to do any custom development. So what this means is that you can see the exact same story from NPR, a story that includes article text, it's got images associated with it, there's audio associated with it, and you can see how this story looks if you look at it on npr.org, on the npr.org player. You can see it on their iPhone app. You can see it on their website, their mobile website. You can see how this story looks on an NPR Addict iPhone app. They didn't even make this. This is like a user-generated app that's talking to their content. You can see it on the public radio player. This is an app that shows content from 500 public radio stations nationwide. You can see it on WBR in Boston. You can see the same story on NPR in Minneapolis. You can see how it would appear on iGoogle, so you can set this up yourself at home. You can see how it will appear in the desktop application for iTunes. By God, if you wanted to hook NPR up to your Xbox and watch that story on TV, you could do that too. And all of this is possible because they have a content management system that is aimed at doing content authoring. It's aimed at getting their staff to create clean, well-structured content. There's no formatting embedded in here. There's the right chunks. There's the right metadata. And then all of that can be accessed through an API, clean, well-structured code that any one of these devices and platforms can go and talk to. And so, honestly, two radically different approaches to getting content out onto mobile devices, different devices and platforms. So, which one of these strategies do you think is panning out the best for these two companies? Well, let's take a look. So the most recent figures for Conde Nast iPad issue come from the end of 2010. And I'm sad to say, the numbers don't look so great. Now, they haven't released any new hard numbers from any new sales or from Newsstand. But just looking at these numbers, you can see that this strategy hasn't paid off all that well for them. I want to call your attention specifically to Glamour. So Glamour is known for being Conde Nast's most lucrative title. They sell about 2 million annual subscriptions. Every month on the newsstand, they sell about 500,000 copies. Now, can you imagine being the poor Glamour magazine staffer that's got to stay up nights and weekends after the magazine goes to bed so that you can make 2 custom iPad editions for different layouts so that you can sell fewer than 3,000 copies? That's just not a strategy that's resulting in any sort of business value for Conde. It's a lot of effort going for not a lot of reward. So let's contrast that with NPR. So what you see is that NPR's page views have skyrocketed. If you look at what they've done over the last few years, according to any metrics that they would judge the success of their business, they are doing really great. And they attribute this directly to their API. They attribute it directly to the fact that they've spent the last 5 years or so investing in building an API that allows them to have all this clean, well-structured content that they can use flexibly in a variety of ways. And more important, what you see is that this API has allowed them to build specialized apps for mobile on a variety of different platforms. So what they can do is they can get all of their content out without having to do custom development. So in contrast with Conde Nast, having to take print content and then try to figure out how to manually rework that for the tablet, NPR says that they can build an iPhone app, they can build an iPad app, they can build a mobile website, an HTML5 site. They can do it quickly, sometimes in a matter of weeks, because they took the time to invest ahead of time in their content. So NPR's page views have gone up 80% as a result of this strategy. 80%. Could you imagine if Conde Nast's strategy has resulted in an 80% increase in business value for them? Like, the guy with the cocaine cart would be back.